welcome to another video here on the Critical Focus channel. First off, a big shout out to all my members who support my work and keeps the paint flowing and the electricity running. Members do get access to the member Discord, will influence the content, the matchups, whatnot. There is a join button below if you feel so inclined. But regardless, I am happy for your support in the form of actually just watching the video, of a like and a comment, and if you haven't already, please do feel free to subscribe as well. And if you are looking to buy Warhammer merch, there is an affiliate link in the video description as well. Let's get on with the video. Okay folks, time to review the final box, and what more fitting than save death for the final. A big thanks for GW, of course, for blessing me with this massive heap of plastic and cardboard to review for you all, paint up and play with for myself. Do make sure to check out the other 3 boxes, as well as my reviews for the 2 new Warbands, Jewels of Itzel and Grandfather's Gardeners, as well as the reviews for the 2 new rival decks released simultaneously. Let's jump into our first Warband here. The Noble Knights of the Grymwatch. Duke Crackmarrow strode into Warhammer Underworlds during the 3rd season of Warhammer Underworlds and quite dominated the whole meta back then with cards such as In the Name of the King. Let us see how they have handled the transition from Warband deck to War Scroll, and how first up the fighter cards have changed. They all sport a feisty 4 move, which will give them an edge in mobility over most Warbands. They all sport a single defense, all but the Duke and the Gristlewell on dodge. Being 7 fighters, they all have a bounty of 1, while health-wise they all have a measly 2 wounds, bar the leader, who is a 4 wound fighter. The bats are of course flying and thus will be unaffected by stagger tokens while moving. Attack-wise, they're pretty basic as any larger warband, with the Gristlewell, Valerique and Crackmarrow able to bring some pain though. Gristlewell gets to keep his old inaccurate but whooping 3 damage attack, which is pretty wild with an early, say, determined effort, while Underdog, a damage spike not usually expected from a Horde warband. Let us turn them over. Move-wise, unchanged, bar the bats that gain move 5, which I believe is still less than their old version. So a huge boost in defense, inspired with all fighters picking up 2 dodge, even the previously shielded fighters, and with one of the effects on their War Scroll, it's pretty significant. Attack-wise, Valerique and Gristlewell especially becomes quite potent, and the leader merges his range 1 and 2 into a more potent range 2 hammers, 2 damage attack. Let's move on to the War Scroll. The Inspire. After the last action step and round, you pick an amount of friendly fighters equal to the amount of enemy fighters in enemy and neutral territory combined with the total bounty of slain enemy fighters. So for example, you play Mayaris and you've killed Bahanar. Furthermore, both Eileen and Mayari is in enemy territory, while Senela is sadly in your territory. Bounty of slain fighters, Bahanar, is worth 2, so that's 2, plus 2 fighters not in friendly territory, so 2 plus 2. That means you inspire 4 fighters. This is, as you understand, a bit swingy, as for example versus the Gord Chosen or Morgox, you may have very well killed 0 fighters and all of their fighters has invaded your home turf, which means you inspire no friendly fighters. In most cases though, I think you will inspire between 2 to 4 fighters per round. So I definitely rate this inspire mechanic, generally speaking. It's a different take on their own mechanic, but it's very much the same theme there with defending the hearth and the castle. Let's move on. In the Name of the King is an ability you can use once per round in a power step as long as your leader is alive, instead of playing a power card to either raise a friendly fighter and place them in an edge hex, or inspire a friendly fighter. If you are the underdog when you do so, you may do both. I know that the instead of playing a power card thing isn't worded here, but let's call it a qualified guess. This is very good for 2 reasons. A, they come back fully healed, contrary to some other race mechanics we've seen. B, they do come back in an edge hex rather than the standard starting hex, which is very nice to stretch out your opponents, and especially useful when playing hold treasure tokens. Place a couple of treasure tokens in deep in enemy territory to safely control them against aggro opponents that come charging forward and may not fancy going backwards to kill off now 0 glory fighters. You can also use this power step ability even if your leader is charged out, which is not the case for fighters like Squitch or the Warden, for example. Let's then dive into the once per game abilities. So Once per round you may use one of the following abilities. You can only use each ability once per game. First one is called Defenders of the Realm and means you can reroll 1 dice in your defense roll for the duration of the round as long as you are in friendly territory. That's quite good, especially on 2 dodges. Inspired only in friendly territory, but the fighters you raise over yonder will probably be mostly left alone anyway, and your leader needs to be protected. And next one is called the Royal Hunt, which will give you +1 attack dice versus damaged fighters. Not a bad effect at all. You won't one-shot most things, so this will definitely come in handy when you kind of ping people down with your ghoulish nails. The last one is called To the Walls, which means you may use the In the Name of the King ability twice per round rather than once. Also very, very strong. So that's 2 races, or 1 race and 1 inspire, or 2 inspires, or 2 of both if you're the underdog. Technically you can use them twice in a single power step to really get back into the swing of things, say before you take your first action step in round 2, if your opponent goes first. Chuck down 2 0 bounty ghouls behind enemy lines and let the shenanigans commence. I think they look pretty fun, mobile and well suited for hold, with some neat strong abilities and decent counterpunch. I definitely look forward to playing these guys. Our next warband is going to be the Orsiriak Bone Reapers from Diachasm, Kainan's Reapers. Kainan was quite intimidating when he appeared with the strong faction deck packed with the crazy upgrades and a very hard-hitting leader. Since then he's kind of fallen off a bit, so let's see how he fares now. Fighter cards first. First up, we see a rather substantial nerf with move 2 here, just like the Sepulchral God. All fighters have a single defense die, mostly shields, bar Nohem and Hakor, who sports dodge. All fighters except Kainan have only 2 wounds. Kainan keeps his previous 6 wounds, but the Kenta then loses a wound. Bounty is 3 on Kainan, 1 on all other except Nohem, who is no glory, which is a bit strange fighter stats wise, but yeah, we gotta end at 7 I guess, and yeah, all warbands are a bounty total of 7. Kainan's attacks has lost damage 3 on range 2, but is still damage 2 on that range, which is still stronger than most fighters uninspired, but retains that damage 3 on range 1 instead. Both attacks on 2 hammers. So other than Kainan, Hakor and Kenta will be your main damage dealers, who can both dish out 2 damage range 1. Let's turn the fighter cards over to reveal their inspired side. All go to 3 move here, which is very welcome as they previously had 3 move uninspired. Here we see Kenta merge his attacks to a respectable 2 hammers, 2 damage, 2 range attack, and keeping fighters at arm's length is probably key for him at a measly 2 wounds now. Hakor gets a respectable 3 hammers, 2 damage, while Kainan merges his attacks to a range 2, 2 hammers, 3 damage. So 1 damage down from his previous profile on 4, but still sort of top of the food chain in this edition in terms of range 2 attacks for damage, but we will see a heavier hitter later in this review. So my initial feeling after looking at these fighter cards is that they will struggle with 2 move uninspired, and they will struggle with survivability even more than before while not getting a boost in offense. But let's see what the War Scroll tells us. So the Inspire tells us that after an enemy fighter is slain, gain a number of Bone Tithe tokens equal to the bounty of the slain fighter. After your action step, you can remove a number of Bone Tithe equal to the bounty of a friendly fighter and inspire that friendly fighter. So basically you can, as written at least, just straight up start with inspiring Nohem, as he is 0 bounty. Not that he gains a ton from doing so, but that should compute, I guess. Previously you inspired your entire warband after getting your 3rd tithe counter, which were pretty much equivalent to how you gain them now, so this is rather a significant nerf, and it feels overly harsh honestly to just inspire 1 at a time, as they are not really that strong apart from the leader. I guess the upside is that you don't need your leader or Kenta alive to keep collecting them, but that's a very kind of slim boost, because basically if Kainan is dead, your warband crumbles. So Mortek Advance tells us that the minions, everyone except Kainan and Kenta that is, can react to either Kainan or Kenta using a core ability in your action step. So you can use this reaction if either of those fighters makes an out of sequence core ability as well, because this does not have to happen in the action step. Anyway, each minion may then react with moving, but must end the move adjacent to another minion. This is pretty decent up front before you start losing fighters, especially since you can react even while having a move token previously, or even charge token for that matter. But once you've lost a couple of fighters, and you will, it gets progressively harder to end up adjacent to another minion. So the once per game abilities then. First up we have Dire Ultimatum, which is a once per game after your action step, which means your fighters can't be attacked in the next action step unless the attack is directed towards your leader. And yeah, obviously you can only use it if Kainan is still alive. Pretty decent, but for single activation, most Warbands will probably find something useful to do anyway. And Kainan is now only one shield inspired. He's not that hard to wear down either. But still, it goes a small way to keep your fighters around, I guess. But it was way more powerful as a ploy when you had like minus dice upgrade and 2 shields on Kainan. So yeah, it's not amazing really. Next one is called Monolith Stance, and means you may guard an amount of friendly minions equal to the battle round after your action step. Sure, it's 3 guard tokens in round 3, but you're only 1 defense and you'll likely not have 3 minions around by then, if even 1. Last one is called Unrelenting Assault and lets you react to your action step to remove a move or charge token from a friendly minion. I would much rather it be after your opponent's action step to ensure you'd be able to use the fighter straight away. Removing a move or charge on your fighter after your action step mostly kind of paints a big old target ring on that fighter. Nah, I'm not overly impressed by Kainan's Reapers, honestly. Sure, Kainan can still pack a punch and he can still pick up Grievous and +1 dice and rerolls, what have you, but so can every other fighter in the game. And with less than stellar abilities and a heavily nerfed Kenta, he will quickly find himself alone on the battlefield, I'm afraid. Uninspired, you'll mostly have to fear his range 1, so it's also gonna be easier to just run rings around him without that super scary range 2 attack. Yeah, let's move on to our next warband, the Headsman's Curse, branded as a strike warband here. Hailing from Nullwood if memory serves, and bound to the sword terminus, there must always be a wielder of the blade. There must always be a bearer of the block. There must always be a scriptor of the sentence, and there must always be a sharpener of the blade. Pretty sweet lore dump, eh? Let's check out the fighter cards. They all sport a ghostly 4 move with 2 dodge on the biggest and smallest fighter, while the middle chaffs sport 1 dodge. Health-wise, just like before, they range from 5 down to 2, but the scriptor has gained 1 health, which is not insignificant given his important role in this warband, and we'll get to that soon. Bounty-wise, the big lad is worth 3, the bearer 2, the scriptor 1 and the sharpener 1. Just like before, the wielder sports 3 damage and the bearer 2, while the other ones only does 1, the scriptor from range 3, with his ghostly town hall sentences, I guess. Let's flip them over to find their inspired sites. All fighters gain their second dodge, and the wielder goes to a whooping 4 damage without needing Grievous to get there. So slap a Grievous on that and kill Morgok or Drom in a single fell swoop. Wow. Ouch. He is not the only dangerous fighter here, however, as the bearer picks up 3 damage via Grievous as well, and in a jiffy the sharpener can dish out 2 damage if he finds that crit on crit Grievous. Not bad at all. Let's check the war scroll. So we have to start with the trial and execution here. Sorry for a slightly foggy image here, but I'll break it down for you. At the start of your first action in a phase, you pick an enemy fighter within 5 hexes of a friendly scriptor of the sentence to be condemned for the battle round. And then after a condemned fighter is slain, you get to draw power cards equal to the bounty of the slain fighters. But of course, it also ties into the inspire condition. After an action step where damage was done to a condemned fighter from an attack made by a friendly fighter, you inspire the attacking fighter. So ideally, if you want to kind of pull off several inspires on a single enemy fighter, or at least say maybe 2 inspires. Start up with a ranged attack from the scriptor to take him to that important second dodge on his inspire side, and possibly then move in with a bear next to get him into survival mode as well. Your leader can in most cases wait. Picking up 4 damage isn't super crucial in most games, and after all, even uninspired, he'll get there via Grievous if need be. A different but not at all bad take on the role Inspire. I quite like this one. Let's check out the once per game abilities. Ethereal Duty lets us raise a friendly fighter after the leader takes an enemy fighter out of action, and then place them in an empty hex next to your leader. This is a once per game raise, contrary to his old raise, but it also brings back a fighter with full health. A fully healed bearer of the block isn't too shabby. Do note though, And same goes for Grymwatch. As per the core rules now, the slain fighters are uninspired, so any fighters coming back from the grave will do so uninspired, regardless if they inspired previous to dying. Wet the Blade is quite meh now. It's a once per game Grievous to the leader's weapon, reacting to him making an attack while adjacent to the sharpener. Sure, it's not an action anymore, but previously you could wet the blade, even several times if you wanted to, and then charge into the fray without the need of the sharpener to be anywhere close. So this will be a bit tricky to set up, I guess, without like out of sequence moves or pushes. Next one is a core ability, Discorporate. Here you can remove a fighter from the battlefield and place them in an empty hex. Were this not a core ability, it would be pretty neat way of setting up that previous Wet the Blade ability. Definitely hurts that it's an action, but will still be useful at times, I guess. But a Strike Warband ideally don't want to waste their actions, you know, not attacking. Lastly, we have a Cackling Court, which is a search ability for when you attack a flanked or surrounded enemy fighter to count both swords and hammers as successes. That's pretty sweet, especially with extra dice in the mix. I think overall they look just fine, nothing too exciting, but I do like how they've handled the Inspire, honestly. But some of these once per game abilities were a bit meh. Fighter cards still look mighty fine though. That 4 damage without Grievous is looking really scary. So, only one left, and it's time for Vampires and the Crimson Court. Introduced in the excellent Dire Chasm season, they've always been quite strong, very solid, accurate, mid-damage dealers with some fun alternative hunger builds as well. So let's see how they've fared in this edition. Okay, so initially we see some nerfs here with Duval and Gorath down to 3 move from 4, while Enyas and Velas keeps the roll speed. But we also note here that Enyas is now flying from the get-go. Furthermore, we have Enyas dropping to 3 health, which is rather frail, uninspired at least. Offensively, they've pretty much kept the roll stats, apart from Gorath's range 2 being nerfed, but that's pretty much the same treatment as everyone else has gotten. Bounty-wise, everyone except Batboy is 2 glory. Let's flip them over to find their inspired stats, and here we see Duval pick up his 4th hammer, slap on a Grievous, and you can get a nigh impossible to defend attack. He also finds that 4th move, but does not find, though, his previous 2nd shield. Velas gains no accuracy but goes to 2 dodge at least, while Gorath picks up a very respectable damage profile with 3 damage, range 1, 2 damage, range 2. Both on 2 hammers. He's the only one not going to at least 4 move though, but given the more respectable range 2 profile it's slightly less of an issue. Enyas goes to 5 whooping move and finally finds his 2nd dodge as well, and also picks up another sword in his attack. Overall stats looks pretty good, not quite their former oomph, but most warbands have lost a similar amount of power. Let's check out their war scroll. Okay, so just like, or sort of like before, you can go either the hungry or the satiated route, but let's start with the Inspire, which also ties into the hold playstyle. Once per power step you can discard a power card instead of playing one. If you do so, gain 1 control token for each treasure token you hold. Immediately after you gain a 3rd control token, you remove all control tokens and inspire a friendly fighter. That fighter is also no longer savage, which we'll get to soon. So I did play these guys and they actually inspired quite fast. Inspiring Enyas first is not a bad idea given the single dodge being a bit scary, weak on 3 wounds. Then it's pretty much a toss-up between Gorath and Velas, I'd say. Taking Velas to 2 dodge might be a good idea if you need to survive and have enough bodies to hold treasure tokens, while inspiring Gorath gives you some heavy counterpunch with that 3 damage. Inspiring the leader simply adds an extra move and an extra die to an attack key that's already very accurate. So it's sort of the least important one to inspire up front. Anyway, you may also completely forgo the whole inspire shenanigans and take the hungry savage route. Each time a friendly fighter attacks, you gain 1 hunger token. Then you can discard 3 hunger tokens and pick a friendly fighter and uninspire them and stagger them as well. They are now savage. Savage fighters have +1 move. Alright, so with this knowledge, let's take a look at the once per game abilities. First up, Bestial Transformation, which is a once per game opportunity to discard all of the fighter's upgrades to gain +1 attack dice for the round. If they are also savage, they have +1 move, So this then equates to +2 move, +1 from being savage and +1 from the bestial transformation. Obviously this is mostly a range 1 warband, so the +1 attack dice mostly equates to +1 attack dice in a single attack, but it's still not too bad, and accessing more than one attack while outcharged isn't an impossible prospect for a relatively small warband. Next up is Vampiric Might for when you pick a weapon with a savage fighter to gain cleave and ensnare. The weapon has cleave and ensnare for that attack, so I'm not entirely sure if this is to mean you get both effects at the same time, although normally you wouldn't be able to, or if it means that the weapon has access to both effects during that attack. In either case, I don't think it's all too sensational, but could be a decent slap-on effect together with the brutal transformation +1 attack dice buff there to double down on accuracy for a key attack. Then we have the Tenebrious form to gain 3 dodge for a single defense roll on an inspired friendly fighter. Pretty decent effect, especially now that Duval has been stripped of his sexy 2 shields defense inspired. Lastly, we have Gorath's old inspired spell action translated to the last once per game ability here, with doing 1 damage on an enemy fighter within 1 hex of a friendly fighter, while that friendly fighter heals 1. If the friendly fighter is inspired, that enemy fighter can be within 2 hexes instead. Yeah, this is pretty sweet. Heal on a smaller warband is way more valuable than on a large one, and getting ping and heal for the price of 1 ability is pretty nice. So we sort of have 2 abilities that works, or at least works better, on inspired fighters, and 2 that pretty much only works on savage fighters. So if we want to go either route with our entire crew, we are sort of shortchanged on abilities here. I think I would rather have liked to see some sort of different effect for all these 4 depending on whether the fighter you picked is inspired or not. That would have been more to my like. Sort of like how Vampiric Might and Von Morusi's armor worked for the first edition vampires. Also, inspiring them comes at a pretty steep price with discarding power cards at steady rate. Compare that to Ilthari that inspires via card draw instead. These guys has to lose power cards to inspire. I don't quite see how that's fair, as these guys has to lose a fair bit of the card tech that's there to enhance the warband's chances of scoring the deck to even inspire. And if they go savage, they get staggered as well, so kind of lose-lose situation. As I said, I would have wished for alternative effects at least on the abilities, rather than sort of 2 abilities that are strictly unusable on inspired fighters. Sure, inside the first round you probably won't inspire all fighters anyway, so brutally transforming one is probably fine, but I still feel the War Scroll is lacking here. Also, I think the brutal transformation needs clarification. The old brutal transformation ploy did not require you to discard an upgrade if you had none, but that doesn't mean it works the same here, and it needs to be clarified, so hopefully that'll be addressed. Well, sorry to end on a slightly disappointing note here. I love the Vamps and they're some of the best models in the game, and just because I have some issues here doesn't mean they won't be fun to play, so as always take it with a hefty grain of salt and do form your own opinions at the gaming table. It's just the ramblings of a sleep-deprived father after all. Leave a like on the video and stay tuned for more content. I'm not sure my throat will hold up. For the new rival decks I may have to postpone those a couple of days, but let's see. Otherwise, have a great rest of your day. Take care, bye.